About me, a little bit on my background very, very quickly. Previous SOC analyst, SOC lead. I love living in the blue team world. Cyber defense and security operations is my wheelhouse. I am a SOC consultant, a senior instructor here at the SANS Institute, and course author for our two SOC classes, one for SOC analyst training and the other for SOC leadership training. Those are SEC 450 and LDR 551. Also the cyber defense curriculum lead. So if you have any questions or requests for classes you'd like to see from the curriculum, feel free to get a hold of me. I'm easy to find online, on LinkedIn and all that kind of stuff. Also the host of a podcast called Blueprint. I'll have a link to that at the end of the presentation. If you're interested in being a SOC analyst, it is the podcast for you. Okay, let's jump in. So phishing, right? We all know it is a major, major threat, but I always like kicking off my presentations with a little bit of actual, like what is really going on here and get people hooked and kind of passionate about what we're going to cover. Yes, phishing is bad. Yes, we all know phishing is bad and all the many things that it can bring, but I really want to paint a quick picture of what that can look like here. It's things like this that fuel me as a security operations professional. I read headlines like this, and it makes me very, very angry and sad for people who have randomly become victims of crime, and it absolutely destroys their life. This is a recent article about a company called Knights of Old. It was a logistics company in the UK. They existed for 150 years. And then Russian hackers were able to break in, deliver ransomware, tie up the company, tie up the finances, and they brought them down in 3 months because they ultimately couldn't pay their bills and they had to shut down. That is one of the most unfair and absurd things that I can conceive of, and I can't even imagine what it would be like to be in this position as an employee or as an owner, especially of this company that people have worked their entire life to continue to build. 720 people lost their jobs as a result of this. And this is not like a unique case, right? These things are happening all over the place. I brought up on the Tor browser a couple of dark web ransomware group websites. These are all live ransoms happening right now. Misery all over the world, right? This is one of the groups that I brought up. Here's another one called Akira. You can scroll and scroll and scroll and see all these different companies, people who have had their data stolen and either have run out of time to pay the ransom, and now that data is available publicly if you go to these download links, or the timer is counting down. So just some of the various things that are happening right now. All of these companies are potentially in this position. It is a highly disruptive problem, and a lot of this comes back to phishing, right? By the way, if you're interested in this, check out ransomlook.io. It is a great website that kind of summarizes what's going on around ransomware groups right now. If you go to recent posts, it actually aggregates like a whole bunch of different websites, and it will give you a list of all of the organizations, and you can see, multiple per day all over Earth in this situation. So that is what motivates me. And that is why we're going to be talking about phishing today, and hopefully give you some tips and tricks so that you can make sure this doesn't happen to the place you work. So what are we going to talk about today? Phishing tactics I want to cover, although we only have 25 minutes and this is going to be pretty rapid fire. I tried to group them into two sort of things. One is defense evasion and a whole bunch of ways defense evasion is done. And another is credential access via MFA, multi-factor authentication bypass. A lot of us are doing modern auth, but that doesn't mean it is bulletproof, and that just because you have a second factor for authentication, attackers can't get into your accounts. So we're going to talk about things like hiding that it is a phishing page from some of our scanners and bots. We're going to talk about using trusted sources to deliver malware so that when that phishing email lands in an inbox, some of your automated scanners end up not finding that it's actually malware, and then people can fall victim to it. Free page hosting services, traffic tunneling, some really clever stuff. And then when we get to MFA bypass, we're going to cover attacker in the middle and device code flow authentication. So we're going to start first with a trend I'm calling hiding from automated scanners in general. The situation is this. Attackers need to get us to their page. And to get us to their page, they have to deliver us a URL to get to that page. But we pretty programmatically, in any way that someone can receive a link, are going to be scanning those links. So if someone sends you an email, your company, especially if you have Microsoft or Google, right, as one of your email providers, and you probably do, there are security suites that are going to look at every single link in every single email and click those links effectively and go there and say, all right, is this a phishing page? If so, don't deliver the email, right? So that's a significant problem for attackers. So attackers have sat back and thought, well, okay, if we know that there's going to be something programmatically visiting my site, how can I make my site look like not a phishing site to these automated scanners, but still appear like a normal phishing site and a legitimate login page, potentially, to the people who are supposed to be the intended victim. So one of the ways that you can do that is a technique that I'm calling browser or bot profiling. So basically, if you run a web server, you get to interact with a client, right? The browser that someone is connecting with. Now, that could be a legitimate victim client, or that could be a bot scanner. So if you're an attacker, your job, one of the things you can do, is to differentiate those two things. So the question then becomes, well, how do we know the difference between what is a bot connecting to a web server, given only the things that a web server can do, and a true victim that they really want to actually steal the password from and deliver the normal page? Well, there's some basic kind of data, right? IP addresses that things are coming from. If it's coming from a corporate IP address, that's a better chance that it's not a scanner versus maybe an Amazon AWS IP or something like that. We could geolocate it to a country. We could tie that IP address to an autonomous system network. That's ASNs. And that's basically like who owns that IPv4 space. If you saw it was, I don't know, VirusTotal, I don't know if they have their own ASN, but something like that, it would be pretty clear that it was probably a scanner and not the intended victim, versus an IP address that may be coming from, I don't know, here in Philadelphia, like a FiOS home internet connection, right? Those kind of things are available. What about the user agent? Anytime someone clicks on a page, the server is going to receive a user agent field that says, this is the modern version of Chrome. This is the modern version of, Firefox or whatever someone is using. You can also profile how TLS connections are made and do what is called a JA4 hash. I wish I had time to get into JA4 hashes here, but largely you can think about it like this. It looks at the TLS extensions, it looks at cipher suites, it looks at how the handshake is made to initiate that secure connection, and it hashes it. What is the URL visited? Is the scanner going to the root domain name like phishingsite.com, or is it going to phishingsite.com/ and then some unique ID? I put that there because there are some phishing tools we'll talk about later, one of them being EvilJinx, where if you go to the root of the website, the person who is setting up the attack can redirect that to anywhere, and it's going to look like a totally benign page. Whereas if you go to phishingsite.com/ a specific unique ID, then you will receive the page. Right. So depending on how the scanner is doing it, looking at the whole domain versus specific URLs, there may be some things that can be done there. And then another one is JavaScript. If JavaScript is enabled, the browser may be able to say, oh, yeah, right, a bot that doesn't run JavaScript is clearly not a person. Everyone is browsing the internet with JavaScript enabled, or everything would be broken. And once JavaScript is enabled, you can profile even more. You can do things like look at the resolution of the window, or the battery charge level, or the window size of the browser, and the video card, and all sorts of other things. So there's a whole bunch of things that you can look at there. If you're interested in seeing what you can see about your browser, go to deviceandbrowserinfo.com and you can get a picture of that. Point being here, tools like EvilJinx that are designed for multi-factor bypass attacks, which we will hit again later on, they look at these things and they say, okay, these are what bots look like. And the developers of EvilJinx, I watched the whole presentation on this, submitted purposefully a whole bunch of fake phishing pages to these search engines and then wait until the bots hit it and then profiled the bots and not only put them on a block list and say, like, here's are the JA4 hashes, here's how they connect, here's their user agent, but also you can add anything to that list anytime you want and customize it as a user of one of these things. So attackers are very good at understanding if you are actually the victim or not. So you have to be very, very careful in the way that you connect to these sites to understand if it is a phishing site in the first place or not, and understand your bots may not see the real page. And so when you're manually investigating it, make sure you're camouflaging your browser and looking exactly like a victim. Otherwise, you might not be served the web page. Another thing that's very closely related to this is CAPTCHAs. This is a very simple one here. The idea is if you have a browser that is real, the victim sees the CAPTCHA, they click, yes, I am a human, then they're presented the phishing page. And then it goes like any normal CAPTCHA interaction. But if you put a CAPTCHA in front of your phishing page and a bot visits it, well, bots aren't supposed to be able to click on CAPTCHAs, right? And so they can never see that it's a phishing page, which means it can't be labeled a phishing page, which means maybe that link gets through. So as a defender, if you are investigating what appears to be a questionable link and you run into a CAPTCHA page, some of the options for doing this, by the way, reCAPTCHA, Cloudflare turnstile is a pretty big one. Those are good signs that if you see a questionable domain followed by a reference to one of these services, you could be looking at what is a CAPTCHA protected phishing page. In fact, I went to URL Scan.io and I found an example of this earlier a couple days ago, and I PCAP'd myself going to that website and hitting that. And what does this look like in DNS? This was actually a piece of malware that was hosted on box.com. It was a benign looking file. That file had a link to another document that was hosted on a random long name, .workers.dev. That is another Cloudflare service. And then that bounced to challenges.cloudflare.com. So even if you're just looking at DNS, you could see this flow of like someone went to a file sharing site, then they went to one of these serverless pages hosted by Cloudflare. That's workers.dev. They also have pages.dev, R2, other things like that served by Cloudflare. And then ultimately the Cloudflare turnstile service, which is challenges.cloudflare.com. And I also saw turnstiles show up in some of the other content on the pages as well. So if you're familiar with that terminology, you may be able to spot this in your packet captures. Another thing is data encapsulation with HTML smuggling. So here's the idea. Attackers need to serve malicious files, but defenders will scan every file that is sent over the wire. If you have a proxy, the proxy is going to be saying that file's okay, that file's okay, that file's okay. But what if you embed one file inside another file such that it is hidden and the scanner can't tell that there is one file nested inside another? And that nested file is actually the malicious thing that can then later on unfold and expand to become that bad thing. That is what HTML smuggling is all about. And that's another trend in delivering stuff in a way that you can't tell exactly what it is upon initial visit and scanners miss it. So here's some of the technical details on this. HTML5 and JavaScript allow you to create what is called a blob, right? This is a binary object where you can say like, here's a bunch of bytes for an executable or even HTML for a phishing page, as we'll see on the next slide. And when someone visits a page, that can be part of the code. So they download JavaScript. The JavaScript itself has a blob of binary data, but that binary data is encoded and obfuscated. And it also has the code to decode that and say, take all these bytes, put them in as a blob on the hard drive, and then it can either be a file that's saved as though you downloaded the file, or as we'll see on the next slide, something that someone bounces to as another page that actually loads locally from the machine, which is really an interesting way of getting around some of these scanners, right? Because now that traffic is not going over the wire. Well, it is, but it's going over in an obfuscated form. So this is a very, very tricky thing to do. One of the more advanced ways of getting around this problem is what is called content disarm and reconstruction. There are some vendor tools out there that can do this. And the idea is if you're downloading a PDF, it's going to say, hold on, take the PDF. It's going to visually copy what's on the page, strip out all the junk, recreate it, and then give you the safe sanitized file. That's one hardcore way of getting around this problem that does exist. The other thing is just as a defender, understanding what this looked like, that it's possible. And then if you have TLS decryption and a packet capture, you can pull the packets out and see what's going on. So here's an example of that. What we have here is a very simple JavaScript where there is a variable, that is created up on the top here, decoded string A to B. So A to B means ASCII to binary, and there is an encoded string of bad stuff. They decode it, they put it into a new blob on that second line, and then they craft a URL out of that my blob object that was created. And then from there, they're actually taking part of that and they're forming an href tag and then filling in that URL after it. So what they're doing here is they're downloading a bunch of stuff. They're dynamically crafting a whole web page and a link to that web page. And then that link to that web page is inserted on the page that the person's already looking at. And then JavaScript clicks that link. That's that A0.click. So this is basically you hit a page and then you see another page. But the tricky part about this is, and as you can see in the little highlighted portion on the left side of this slide, it says blob. That is information that is loading locally in memory in the browser. So file scanning for files that hit disk are not going to scan this. And your IDS and your proxy is probably not going to realize that this is a file that even exists because it's an encoded blob that locally gets transformed into a phishing page. And so once you hit that, you can see the picture here, right? Adobe Document Cloud, you want to sign in with Outlook? You want to give me my Office 365 credentials? You want to sign in with other mail and give me those passwords? Those things are all there. So this is something to definitely be aware of. You can see it in the code and craft it. You can take that code. You can take it over to CyberChef and decrypt it or whatever you need to do. But be aware of that potential issue there. We also have precision validated phishing. This is something that I just saw in a write-up recently from Cofense. That's their name for it. Basically what this is attackers, again, want to hide their page. So this is a very simple technique. You send someone to a phishing page. On that page, you will see what is in the middle here, confirm your identity. You type in an email address, you hit next. What's first happening is the server is saying, is this email an intended victim that I want to even show the page to? If not, it redirects you somewhere else. So in this case, I typed in some random stuff at mail.com and it popped up this box that says, hey, no encryption key associated with this email. We're not even going to show you the page. Now, there's various things that can happen here. That's how this page dealt with it. But you could have it redirect over to Wikipedia or do whatever. But ultimately, you don't even get to see as a defender or as a bot that this is a phishing page unless you type in a valid email address. So that presents some issues. You can also see that very top arrow that I have here points out this is something that is hosted on S3 from Amazon. And you can look at the subdomain here. Another tell here is if you're looking at S3 subdomains like S3 US East Amazon AWS.com, and the subdomain contains things like, I don't know, sign on OneDrive or something like that, that could be a good sign that something funny might be going on. Regardless, what are defenders going to do about precision validated phishing? This one's actually kind of difficult. I'm bringing this up more so that you know about it. I don't have a perfect answer for this one, but here's what you could do. If it's going to your company, you probably know who the intended victim is, right? So if you want to, you could type in the original recipient of that email because they're probably on that list. And this is one of the things from that write up. They said there is a list that sometimes can be accessed and you can figure out who the intended victims are. And you could type in one of those from your company, from another company. What's going to happen then? You're going to see the page, but Cofense wrote up in this thing that they said sometimes when you type in a valid email address, it sends another email to that person and says, hey, I'd like you to validate, right? Something. Click on another link, do whatever. You're also potentially blowing your operational security because you're telling those victims, like, hey, this is someone that responds to phishing links in their email. So if you want to see the page, you're going to have to type something in and you're going to have to decide whether it's worth getting that information to potentially say, like, hey, this could look like a live victim that might continue to be harassed. So it is something that's out there. Be aware, fairly clever technique. There's another trend, hosting malicious files on good, quote unquote, file sharing websites. We have a whole bunch of documents, PDFs, and all that kind of stuff that can be hosted on these sites. Normally, businesses use it to share. What if an attacker just simply uploads malware and says, make this publicly available, and then sends that link in your direction? Well, if that's what happens there, then what you will see is a link to Dropbox or OneDrive or another company's SharePoint account. And so there's a company called Netscope that does a bunch of threat intel blog posts, and they actually said, here are the things that we have seen in terms of services for delivery in this method. GitHub, OneDrive, Webflow, that's going to come up later. Azure Blob Storage, the similar feature to Amazon S3 that we saw. Amazon S3 is down there. Outlook.com, WeChat, right? Anything that is on one of these publicly available shares is something that you might want to question. So with that in mind, what can these attacks look like? Well, here's one that I found as a write-up from Cofense as well. They said, here is an email in the upper left there. That is the actual email. It's kind of small, but it's basically a totally legitimate email that says, hey, someone shared a file with you, because the attackers did share a file with that victim. The victim clicks on the link. They will see a completely legitimate files.fm, that is a file sharing service, link that says, hey, someone shared this PDF with you. It's a PDF. It's a normal PDF. The PDF you can see in the bottom left, there are two links in it. I know it's a little small. I had to fit this all on the page. One says preview, one says download. If you click on the preview link, in this case, it was a choose your own adventure. If you want to give them your password, you click preview, and it actually brought you to a fake login site, as you can see there. It's emaxpipeworks.com, but it looks like a Microsoft page, not real. Or if you click download, it actually brought you to a malicious download and an executable for a remote access Trojan. So these kind of things, right? What do we do about this sort of stuff? We have to watch out for it and say, like, hey, are we getting email links to known file sharing sites? Maybe we should just outright block those unless there is one company approved solution to these things, or at least scan them and sandbox the items. That's not going to work perfectly. Here's another example. I actually have a video on this one. I'll talk through it as I go through it. Found this on URL Scan. Looks like a real estate website, right? It's a legitimate looking subdomain. It was like Low Miller Real Estate Lawrence something app.box.com. It brings up this document. This document has a link in it. Open the full PDF here or download. All right, so I go to open that up. I close this little pop-up box here. And then it brings me to a Microsoft cloned login page. And as you can see, if I pause this real quick, that is not Microsoft. It is hosted on r2.dev. That is the object storage, very much like S3 and Azure Blob Storage, but hosted on Cloudflare. And now we have a live login page. So I go to log in on this, right, with a fake set of credentials, and I'm just trying to figure out what it is. test@don'tphishme.com. I hit next. It says, hey, that's actually not a valid account. What that means is this is relaying whatever I type over to Microsoft, and it's probably going to be intercepting multi-factor auth. This could be Evil Jinx or one of those tools. I wanted to test that. Notice I typed in bill.gates@microsoft.com, and it says, oh, that's a real account. Go ahead and type in your password, Bill. And so this is one of those things that is actually live checking the accounts against Microsoft, because the first one wasn't a real email and it came back with an error. So these kind of things do exist, and they are out there. Multi-stage though, it is a link to a legitimate site. Site brings you to a document. Document brings you to a login page. Login page is checking your email. So what can we do about this stuff? Some basic ideas here. For email, obviously looking at URLs, scanning, blocking, looking for, with AI if you can, any common phishing pretexts that go with it, along with a questionable link. That's something that's becoming more and more possible. Web-based things, block these file sharing sites if you don't need them. If you see single page PDF downloads with links, if you can do file scanning to that level of depth, there's an option there. Page inspection for anything that looks like a Microsoft login page, but is not located on Microsoft.com. Credential access, if you see people going to questionable domain names and then making post requests, and you can do the TLS decryption and see that. Oftentimes post requests, the HTTP method associated with logging in, not a great sign. And then if there is a successful attack here, of course, there will ideally be an anomalous login created and a session generated from an IP address that's maybe a VPN or a Tor exit node or something like that that would help you pick it up. Beyond that, we have one thing that Microsoft called out in a couple different cases that I thought was very interesting as well. And this is leveraging trusted partners and vendors to bypass email-based allow lists. This is terrifying, but it's still ultimately the same thing. It's just an email with all the same tactics that we've largely talked about, but it's going to come from one of your vendors. And what they point out here is this. Attacker goes to organization A. They compromise organization A using any of these methods that we've already talked about. And then once they get a name and password, they're going to look through that person's email history and they're going to say, all right, who are they normally corresponding with? Then once they have that information and they have the ability to send an email, which they do, then they can leverage that person's known trust to that organization B employee and send them a phishing email and say, hey, this person you know and love just shared a file with you. You want to go here? Oh, well, you're going to have to log in to get that file. And then people type in and then they get into that. And then they can run their business email compromise ruse from that company and move on and on and on. And they chain these attacks together. So ultimately what I'm saying here is, even if it comes from a known and trusted source, we still have to not trust it. We have to scan it. We have to do user awareness training that says, even if someone, your best friend at another company, even within your company, right? Teams phishing is another thing that does happen, right? Links within the same company. Those things can still be phishing if someone has compromised the account. Certainly there is less risk of that, but it is far beyond impossible that this kind of thing could happen. So be aware that attackers are leveraging other already compromised accounts and companies to serve these things on their SharePoint sites, to send emails from these addresses, things like that. That is a very tricky detection. It's the same kind of detection. You just have to apply it to people you would normally trust. Another trend, utilizing free site hosting. So obviously attackers have to find places to put their phishing sites because they're constantly getting caught. They're constantly getting taken down. So if they can do this for free, they can iterate very, very quickly, post these phishing sites, use them once or twice. They're going to get caught, move on to the next one. So where are they doing this? I wanted to bring up real quickly two different services I have seen used more recently for this that you might not be aware of. One of them is called Microsoft Sway. Microsoft Sway is meant to be a PowerPoint alternative where you can put a little presentation together, and ultimately it's, basically a web page, right? And so attackers have started using these things, and they are meant to be cloud accessible, easily shareable. And you will see these links that's like sway.cloud.microsoft, and then a long unique ID that goes to that specific Sway or whatever they call it, right? And when you go to that page, it looks like any other PDF or phishing email, right? There's a QR code that's going to try to get people to authenticate from their phone. It could be a malicious link. It could be anything. To catch these, largely go to your proxy, go to your next-gen firewall, go to any kind of logs you have on web traffic, and search for sway.cloud.microsoft, especially with a unique link after it. Your company may use these things. I'm going to guess many people do not. So if you see these, it is a good sign that something questionable could be going on. It is potentially worth looking into, especially if it's VIPs and admins and people like that that are hitting these. You want to be very, very careful. So it's easy to identify them. It's not easy to uniquely identify them as bad, but it is something that you should be aware of and watch out for. Different version, same thing, different service, is a site called Webflow. Webflow is a point-and-click website creator, and of course you can try it out for free. So guess who's trying it out for free? Malware authors and phishers. So they're putting up these things. This is one of a million different examples of these that I found. With this one, it's some subdomain.webflow.io. So if you search the logs for that, you're probably going to find the things that are hosted on Webflow. Again, there are probably tons of legitimate websites on Webflow, but I don't expect a lot of them are business critical sites that a lot of employees would be going to. So what you could do is just look for anything Webflow.io, or you could look for specific high-risk words in the subdomain followed by Webflow.io. So in this case, we have Coinbase. How I found some of these is I went to urlscan.io and I just did domain:/Webflow.io, right? And search for all that. That highlighted a lot of these things and brought them up. So if you want to see more and more examples of this, a lot of these ones tend to be crypto wallet scam sites. So those things are out there and you can look through those. Different trend. Tunneling phishing pages served locally on a machine. So this is another way of hosting a website, but now we're not even using any external infrastructure except for relaying traffic. So here's the problem this is solving. Attackers love to use Sway and Webflow, but someone's going to immediately report those things and say, take it down, right? It's easy to take these things down. So attackers have said, well, okay, what if I generate the page locally on my laptop? Can I get someone to kind of bend their traffic through the internet and then serve something directly from my own computer? Well, actually, you can very easily, and that is through tunneling services. There are a bunch of these out there. One of the ones that is the most common for this sort of thing and the easiest to use for this is Cloudflare. The Cloudflare D client is a thing that you can install and then run a very simple command like Cloudflare D tunnel URL localhost 8080 or whatever port that thing is hosted on. And what's going to happen is Cloudflare, the agent, is going to connect out to the actual Cloudflare service and say, here you go. Here is a URL that anyone in the world can connect to. We're going to receive that traffic as Cloudflare and then send that traffic over to you where you're hosting that website on your laptop. And then you can then phish that person with whatever kind of tool you want, right? So here's an example of that. Again, I just found this morning going over to URL scan. When you do this in the free version, which of course they love using because they have to rapidly go through these, you will see words.cloud or trycloudflare.com. So what this means for you is you can go to your proxy and you can search for these kind of things. As you can see, this is a Facebook imitation login page, but the URL is necessityolympusthan.trycloudflare.com. So again, if you want to see some examples of this, head over to URL scan, look for anything that ends in try Cloudflare. Millions of examples that are available. It's not just Cloudflare. Cloudflare is one of many different services that offer effectively the same thing. So trycloudflare.com is the domain for the one that I just talked about. Local expose is another one that I've seen, and I point that one out specifically because there's a tool called Zfisher that as you clone a page and then host it, it's like, hey, do you want me to also make it available on the internet via this tool called local expose? And it will do that. ngrok is another tool. All of those things, if you see traffic to try Cloudflare, localx, or ngrok.io in your domain, you probably want to check out what people are going to, right? There's some use cases that are valid for this, but a lot of attackers love this because it makes hosting stuff easier. The good news is, if it is just a plain clone of a login page, oftentimes Cloudflare, who's seeing these connections, will also scan these pages and say, no, this is a Microsoft phishing page and shut it down. But if you put a CAPTCHA in front of it or something like that, that might not work. So this is worth looking for. The other thing is this is awesome for attackers to use for exfiltration because it tunnels back out through your firewall and sends that traffic out. So although we're not talking about tunneling and exfil in this presentation, I would be remiss not to mention this. If you see command line commands like Cloudflare tunnels being built or ngrok authentication and creation of tunnels, you probably want to check out what's going on there because most people are not going to be doing this. So if you have EDR, check out your command line or sysmon or something like that installed and see if you find that kind of stuff. Finally, MFA bypass. This is a big one. This is a scary one. This is getting around one of our best protections, right? For years and years, we've been pushing multi-factor authentication, and it's great. I'm not saying that it doesn't do anything. It's a fantastic thing to have, but it's not perfect. Here is what you can do as an attacker if you want to get around someone that has multi-factor auth on their account. You simply sit in the middle. Again, this is a graphic from Microsoft. There is an attacker that creates a fake login form and they say, hey, would you like to log in? What's your username? And I type in, john@microsoft.com or whatever. It takes that, it goes to the real Microsoft page and says, all right, john@microsoft.com wants to log in. Microsoft says, yep, that's a valid name. Ask for the password. You just saw me do that when I typed in bill.gates@microsoft.com on that previous video. Then It presents the password dialog box to me. I say, okay, here's my password. It relays that to Microsoft. Microsoft says, great work, right? You've logged in, but I still need you to click the number, right? So it says, here's the number you need to click. It takes that, it passes it back to me. I see the pop up on my phone. I say 85. And then what happens is they receive the cookie from Microsoft that says, John just logged in, and then they redirect me somewhere else. So what they have captured here is post authentication material. If you're not familiar with this kind of attack, here's a very similar scenario. If you go to a SANS event, you have to go to a table, you have to identify yourself. Here's my ID, I'm registered for this class, and it says John, and he's here for Sec 450. We give you a lanyard that says your name and what class you're supposed to be in. So I, as the instructor, don't really have to do any of that stuff. I just look at your lanyard and I assume you're the right person that should be there. Well, what if someone in the hotel broke into your room and stole your lanyard, and then that person came to class on day one? I wouldn't know anything about that, right? That's post authentication material. That cookie that you're served after you click that button is the same thing as like a lanyard at an event. No one is going to recheck your ID. It's just that kind of thing happening. And so the attacker gets your bearer token, which in this case is your cookie. They insert it into their browser, and they're effectively you. And they are you after you have done a multi-factor auth login. So as long as that cookie is alive, they get to be you. And with that access, they're probably going to go into your inbox and they're going to do all the other stuff we talked about before. This is something that is very easy to do with a lot of tools out there. Evil Jinx is one of the things you'll hear the most about. There's other tools that have been out. Motlishka is one of them. There's Evil Proxy, Zfisher, and other things. Some of those support MFA bypass, some of them do not. But cloning pages and relaying stuff like this is very, very simple. But once you see those cookies used, you will see, right, in like your sign-in logs and risky sign-in logs, ideally, like, hey, John normally comes from here, and now he's coming from a Tor node somewhere else on Earth, right? Microsoft should point in. So there are ways to catch this sort of stuff. The other one, which I think is much less known, is device code phishing. Device code phishing is an interesting one. Microsoft allows this and Google allows this, but a lot of people may not be aware of it. So let's say you go into a conference room where you have to log into, I don't know, the speakerphone or some crazy thing like that where there's no keyboard. What it's going to do is it's going to say like, hey, go to google.com/device and type in this code on your laptop. So I pull up my browser that's already logged in as me in Gmail, and then it says, all right, enter the code that's displayed on your speakerphone or whatever that's in your conference room. It can ask me through my browser for my passkey, for anything else, and then it's going to say, all right, here you go, right? Type in the code. I type in that code, and then I'm logged in. That speakerphone can receive something from Google that says, all right, John just logged into the conference room device. Well, what if an attacker got that code and then took that code and then sent it to you in an email and said, hey, follow this link, go to this link and type in this code. Well, you go to that link, you get a legitimate login page from Google, the multi-factor challenge from Microsoft, Google, or whatever, and then you fill in that information. You're basically giving them the cookie that, in this case, your conference room device otherwise would have received, and now they're stealing, again, post-authentication material. So device code phishing is a kind of off the radar, but still very, very viable multi-factor auth bypass that is out there. So mitigations for this, of course, turn it off. If you do not use these devices, you can completely disable device code authentication flows, which is absolutely something you should do. You can also turn on conditional access policies. You can look at your risky sign-in policies and everything like that, right? Looking at all the logins, where they're happening, how they're happening, and making sure none of this stuff is going on. And then, of course, general guidance on all of this is block legacy authentication. Legacy authentication to Microsoft means ways that you can log in that don't require MFA, even if you have MFA turned on. You should have all of those things disabled, and that closes another big avenue on how this stuff happens. The good news is Microsoft and Google, they're going to log how everyone logs in, like whether it's MFA, whether it's not, what application, and the different kind of authentication flows. So you can look through those and you can look for anomalies, look at all your logins, look for the things that have happened least frequently, and then look at those, analyze those, and you can catch those. So with that, we are at the time. This is the end of my presentation here, but I have one reference to give you. The Blueprint Podcast. I mentioned it at the beginning. I've got a QR code there, or you can just go to any podcast aggregator, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anything like that. And we have a whole bunch of episodes for you to listen to that are relevant to a lot of these attacks. I would suggest if you're listening to this right now and you want to hear more about passwordless authentication, which is where we should all be going, check out one of the more recent episodes I just made in season 3. It was like 2 or 3 episodes ago, called How Phishing Resistant Credentials Work. I got 2 people from Microsoft explaining how that works and how it can save you from a lot of these problems and make it much less likely that your company will be the next headline in one of those news articles. So with that, I am finished. And I see Brian
John,
is back, and I see Mark is lined up, ready to go.
John, just will say, amazing presentation. I think you said it earlier on, fascinating but terrifying.
Yes.
And and I would just add to that, you brought up choose your own adventure books. You know, I would be a
Indeed.
problem for your organization because whenever I read those books when I was younger, I always seemed to choose the wrong path that got the character killed. So I'm a problem for your organization. Don't use me.